Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Cheers!
Cheers.
What are you drinking, Brando?
I am drinking our Chalatenango Sweet.
Wow. I'm drinking our Chala Sour.
Chala Sour?
Wow. Thinking about sweet while sipping sour is a bit of a mind-bending experience. I recommend doing it with caution.
With caution?
Yeah.
What are you tasting?
Definitely this like candied apple, caramel apple top note, and then this tartness that comes through that's really rich and refreshing and bright. And then the finish that's really beautiful and balanced and complex and long.
Yeah, to me, honestly, this tastes like apple juice, like sweet apple juice. It's amazing how much this honey is just straight apples to me.
Yeah.
In the sweet, I feel like you have like a deeper caramel. And the sweetness kind of doesn't give you that floral complexity as much as you might get in the sour. And you could probably get a little bit more fruitiness.
I don't know if you just saw what I did.
What?
I went to give it a sniff and I got meat up my nose.
I hope they see
That's
that.
one of the liabilities of this job. Gotta be careful.
That's perfect. We got that on camera. For the listeners at home, we are also doing a video recording of this podcast, so check it out on our YouTube. You can see Frank almost sniff meat up his nose.
I think I full on did. I just didn't inhale. Yes, that was one of the things that you got to watch out for when you're really getting all into your mead. So you wanted to talk about history of mead today, I believe.
I did. I had some questions about the history of mead. I think where I want to start with you is, so like, what are the first records of mead in history?
Shoot. Well, Dr. Patrick McGovern from Penn State, I believe, might be UPenn. He is a molecular archaeologist, so he goes to burial sites and other ancient archaeological digs, and he gets a hold of the pottery shards that are there from like the drinking vessels and other things that held liquid, and then he microanalyzes the residue that's left over in these sites, and so he has found a number of ancient brews, and he talks about this in his book Ancient Brews, and he has archaeological evidence of an alcohol fermented with honey 9,000 years ago, 7,000 BC, China.
7,000. Whoa! So China is the first recorded place to find mead.
In the Jihu River Valley, which is one of the cradles of civilization. Around that time, like 7,000 BC, 6,000 BC, humans are establishing sedentary culture, and so things like pottery and agriculture or horticulture are starting to pop up in multiple parts of the world. So pretty quickly thereafter, there's evidence of alcohol spreading or being produced in the Middle East, in Europe, continental Europe, and then Africa has an alcohol tradition that goes way back, and there's kind of a big question mark as far as I understand about when it gets started. But if we think about mead, there's the archaeological record that's really like the most solid evidence. But I've recently heard that someone found some evidence indicating that maybe 14 to 16,000 years ago, humans were consuming alcohol.
In Africa, or?
I haven't read the paper yet, but it was Lily from Orrin Moore, artisan meadery up in Washington. She was talking about this at the last UC Davis Intro to Mead Making course.
Oh, okay.
That was 2 weekends ago, so I haven't had a chance to read the paper. But apparently there's some evidence out there that like 14 to 16,000 years ago, humans were drinking alcohol. And Ken Schramm talks about the magic bag theory, which is this idea that like fermentation was this technology that our earliest ancestors who came out of Africa took with them They might have had like an animal skin or woven bag or combo that has deteriorated, so we haven't been able to find hard evidence of this, but because it just degrades, it's biodegradable. But imagine that our ancestors are leaving their home and they're carrying with them some important things like weapons, tools, fire, and then this ability to ferment things. So someone is carrying this bag, and as they move to new regions, they're gathering fruit, they're gathering grain, and they're gathering honey, and they're throwing it in this bag, and this bag is mixing with whatever the microbiology from their home mix of the bag is. And if there's alcoholic fermentation, that alcoholic fermentation is killing the microbes that are on the new fruit and the new food, and then inoculating their gut microbiome with this new microflora, microfauna environment.
Gotcha.
So fermentation and alcoholic fermentation with honey might have been one of the fundamental technologies that allowed humans to leave where we evolved from and then go to new places.
Without immediately getting sick and dying.
Without immediately getting sick and dying, exactly.
So if aliens ever come to Earth, give them alcohol.
Wow. Yeah, that's a subject of a different podcast.
That makes sense. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So our ancestors, there's evidence of 14 to 16,000 years ago.
I've heard of it. I haven't read it myself,
Okay.
so I'm not sure.
And the next is China, which is more 6 to 7,000 years ago.
No, it was 7,000 BC, 6 to
7,000.
7,000 BC. So add 2 to that, so
okay.
8 to
8 to
9,000.
9. Okay.
Yeah.
And so those are our earliest findings. So I know each region has kind of a different history within Mead, I guess. So let's start with like Norse mythology and like Vikings, and how did Mead enter into that realm of culture, and like what are the sticking points that you know of?
Yeah, one of the coolest things about the Mead story is that it is truly global. That cultures all over the world drink it. In South and Central America, we'll get into that with like the Mayans and Balche, which is the sacred drink. And then Africa and Ethiopia, there's a mead tradition there that goes all the way back to prehistory, and it's still the national drink, and we can talk about that a bit. And then in Asia and India, there's a fair amount of mead lore as well. But everyone knows the Vikings, so great place to start. So the Vikings were probably keeping bees, and if not, they were very good at finding hives. And there's myths about the mead that they used to drink, and one of my favorite myths is about Odin, who's like the Zeus of the Norse pantheon, right? And he is there at the creation of the universe. He hears about this ogre who has this beautiful daughter, and this ogre's blood is the mead of poetry, and this ogre is there at the creation of the universe. And in Norse mythology, the ogres are kind of like the Titans in Greek mythology. They kind of represent these like untamable natural forces.
Okay.
And so the gods kind of have to do battle with these ogres, and there's all kinds of meetings and complications. But one of the great stories is the story of the Kasavir, Ksavir. I'm probably pronouncing it poorly, but that's what happens when you only read something.
You never hear someone say it by yourself.
Yeah, my wife makes fun of me a lot for doing that a lot. So if you guys know how to pronounce it, let us know. We would love to get corrected and do things better. But the way that I understand the story is Odin finds out about this mead of poetry, and he takes the form of an eagle and gets the mead of poetry, steals it from this ogre. Whether he kills the ogre or just steals it from his reserves is kind of a question. One of the cool things about mythology is there's not one solid story, right? There's as many versions as there are people that have told it. So as the eagle, Odin flies back home and shares the mead of poetry with his people. And he says, when he drinks it, "A drink I took of the magic mead, and I began to know and to be wise, to grow and to weave poems."
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that's how poetry started, essentially?
Yeah.
Okay.
If like you wanted to be a bard or a skald, like have this ability to share this poetry as it came and like transform the experience of your people, the mead of poetry was a huge help to that.
Which
pretty cool.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know poetry had its roots in mead, essentially. In at least some Norse mythology.
Yeah, and it goes back to this Proto-Indo-European language. Have you heard about this?
No.
Yeah, it's an incredible story, and a lot of people don't know about it. So Sanskrit, Latin, and Greek, and Celtic, and Germanic all derive from the same root language.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Kind of like today, everything kind of derives from Latin.
Like the Romance languages, French, Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, Romanian.
I don't know.
I think we're missing one of them. Darn. I think there's 6 of them. Anyways, those all are derived from Latin. Similarly, Latin, Greek, Sanskrit, ancient Germanic, and Celtic all derived from this Proto-Indo-European language. So
it's like the OG language?
Well, of Europe.
Of Europe.
Yeah, and there are some people who would be like, well, you're missing out on a bunch of other, so it's always difficult when you make generalizations because you're like necessarily shaving off huge portions of history. But there's this argument that this language got started in the Caucasian mountain regions of Transoxiana. So like the modern day Stan countries of like Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan and Tajikistan, like that area was where these languages came from. And it's interesting because they talk about that as the Aryan Diaspora. And if you follow the spread of those people, they were in a river valley, like the Laos Plateau River Valley, like the Jehu River Valley. So this was an early site of human culture and sedentary technology, farming and pottery and storytelling and myths. And so those people spread out everywhere from like northern India through Turkey and the Middle East, over to Greece, over to Italy, into mainland Europe and the Celts, and then up into northern Europe and the Germanic people, and then over even into Britain.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So that whole diaspora had a mead tradition because in all of the derived languages, there's some word for mead that's something like metos or madu or mjod, right? Like super cool. And the conjecture is that in Sanskrit, that word was preserved. So in Sanskrit, the word for the drink that they drank back then was madhu. And it kind of means, we'll get into Indian mead lore in a little bit, but it translates over into German, ancient German as mjod, and there's Odin, who's like the Zeus of the Norse pantheon, drinking it, and in that altered state, right? Humans learn through comparison, right? We don't know how hot it is until we've felt cold, and then by comparing them, we can like, oh, that makes sense, right? And like dark and light, we don't know what they are until we've seen both. And similarly, we don't know what normal consciousness is until we've experienced altered states of consciousness. And so like the altered state of consciousness that creates poetry is maybe easier to get into when you've had some mead.
That's true.
So that was a long-winded answer to your question.
Well, a lot of things are easier when you're drinking some mead.
Responsibly.
Yeah.
But yes.
Well, I think what I got from that and what's super cool is that like mead is something that connects cultures, and I feel like today we need more connection, and I think mead is one of the ways we can do that. And from what you just told me, there are very few things that all those offsprings have in common, but one of them they all could agree on is mead, essentially.
Yeah.
Because it's theorized that they all drank mead when they were a part of that river valley.
And it goes beyond the people who spread out from that one river valley. It's like over in this river valley, there was some kind of zeitgeist where in China, the same technology arose, even though what was the connection between those people? Was there any? So you've got Asia, you've got northern India, like you've got China, you've got northern India, you've got Europe, and then you even have southern North America and northern South America, where the people down there, mostly the Mayan people as far as I understand, are harvesting honey from the Melipona which is a stingless bee.
Okay.
And they're gathering that, honey-like substance. There's a debate over whether it's actually honey, because the U.S. defines honey as the product of honeybees, but like Melipona is a social bee that produces a sticky substance that humans eat. So for my intents and purposes, I'm going to call it honey.
That's fair.
And then they take that honey and they water it down and they put it in the trunk of the bulche tree, and then they let it ferment, and it becomes a sacred drink that they share at their ceremonies, and the gods come down to the ceremonies and hang out with the people while it's happening.
So that's Mayan, the Mayan tradition, essentially.
Yeah, as I understand it.
So that was happening in a completely different continent.
Yeah, arguably North and South America.
Yeah.
And the whole extent of the Mayan culture.
And so even though they aren't connected with the Norse Vikings or anything like that, they still have their own traditions with honey. And were these places using grain too with honey, or like is there evidence of just honey and water, or were they just mixing everything together? Or is it a mixed bag?
Yeah, the Vikings had a word for beer.
Okay.
And then I think different times of the year, grain was used as a food. And honey was like, okay, we've got honey to make mead with. And there's also an argument that maybe they only made it one time a year, that there was a mead moon that came in the summer. And so they harvested the honey, they made the mead. Or excuse me, no, that's when they drank the mead. The next month was wort moon, W-O-R-T,
Yeah.
which is probably when the grain was coming in, so they probably made beer too, but there's a good chance that that's when the honey was coming in, and they fermented it, and then they let it age for a whole year.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then they drank it on the next mead moon.
Mm.
And like typically people would get married then, and then there'd be a good chance that they were going to have babies.
Oh.
So that's where the honeymoon came from.
Oh,
It
really?
was a whole moon cycle of mead
Oh,
and having
interesting.
babies. Yeah. And there's people who say that that's probably apocryphal, but like it shows up in so many different cultures, and the moon cycle, the lunar calendar, was used globally until the Roman Empire was like, no, solar calendar. We're going to be able to run the empire a lot easier if we're on a 12-month solar calendar than if we're on a 13-month moon calendar, because every region would call the moons different things based off their agriculture. And so it became very confusing and difficult to administer.
Gotcha. So even before the Roman Empire, like people were going off the lunar cycle, and they were having very similar experiences with mead, even though they weren't connected with each other.
Yeah, like it probably came down from the Aryan diaspora throughout most of Europe, but then over there in China, there's some kind of mead tradition going on that we have hard archaeological evidence of. Over in Central and South and North America, there's some kind of mead tradition that's going on. And then in Africa, it's like going back to time immemorial.
So let's do Africa.
Yeah.
So what is different about Africa's mead tradition than what you're talking about?
Yeah, so with Africa's mead tradition, it maybe goes back further than that 14 to 16,000 years we were talking about, like to the dawn of humanity as a species, like 1 million years ago.
Jeez.
Yeah, like we don't know. It's very difficult to pin it down, but we do know that they have a mead tradition that in Ethiopia, which is like in the Horn of Africa, and Eritrea, there are meaderies where people gather today, and they hang out and they have like communal drinking vessels that they all put a straw into, or they all get individual little drinking vessels, and then a lady who probably made the mead sits at a piano and sings songs and like tells stories about all the community people that are there, and it's this community gathering place around this social substance. And
Is there like a name for it?
Tej is the name of it in Ethiopia.
Okay.
I believe Eritrea has a different name for it,
Okay.
but I'm not clear on what that is.
But Tej is like the name of the celebration where they sit down and drink together and sing songs.
No,
Or
Tej is the name of mead
Oh, okay.
in Ethiopia.
Okay.
Yeah, Tej basically.
Okay. So it just sounds like a concert with alcohol.
Yeah, it's like a community hall where there's songs and laughter and drinking.
And for them, was that once a year too, like other traditions, or did they just do that?
That was every week.
Every week?
Yeah,
Oh,
it's just
okay.
let's go hang out and drink mead and.
So they know
laugh.
what's up. They're partying every week instead of once a year.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stories about Ethiopian culture that I've heard over a long time, that they've had a written language for a really long time. That Solomon went down there after he did his things in Israel and like came down and shared Judaism with the Ethiopians. It was a very early form of Judaism, which kind of throws Israelis for a loop, but apparently there's archaeological evidence of this. The Queen of Sheba like drank mead. There's lots of stories. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of. I mean, coffee is said to have originated from Ethiopia too, and it's has a historic practice, and like they have a little ceremony in a certain way they do coffee there too. So that makes sense that mead has its own thing for Ethiopia. Have you ever done a mead ceremony in Ethiopia?
No, man, I would love to. It's they're going through a civil war right now, right? Yeah. So it's kind of intense. I've met some Ethiopian mead makers who are like so generous and excited when they're like, Dutch. And then like we start talking shop, and I'm like, so how do you make it? And they're like, it's a family secret. Like, oh man! But literally, we were in the Denver airport, and I struck up a conversation with some Ethiopians, and then one of them was like, she makes the dish. Talk to her. And so I talked to her, and I was like, how do you make it? She's like, I can't tell you, but come back. Here's my number. I will get you some. Give me a month before you come.
All right.
Yeah, I was like, oh, this is epic. So mead ties the world together, like you were saying.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So Ethiopia has its own Tej ceremonies, essentially, and their own thing going on.
Tej culture, maybe.
Tej culture.
Yeah.
And they mainly it's a community aspect thing. They sing. Is there anything else like big that they do that's different there, or?
I mean, it's considered the national drink.
Oh, okay.
And Poland, it's also considered the national drink still.
Poland, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So Poland and Ethiopia, mead is considered the national drink.
Yeah.
Okay.
And like mead, in lots of parts of the world, including Russia. Poor Russia. But Dostoevsky used to write about it, and J.R.R. Tolkien, of course, writes about it in Lord of the Rings, and he was a professor of Germanic language and myth, and mead pops up in Lord of the Rings, even though it's a little bit hidden. Mm-hmm. There's a reference to it in the first book where he calls it a drink pale golden in color that had the essence of many flowers, and the elves give it to the hobbits. And when the
that's mead. Oh wow, okay. That makes more sense. Okay.
And then after a few drinks, they're snapping their fingers at the thought of dark riders and rain, and their journey of many miles would be over in only a few steps.
Okay. That makes more sense to me.
Yeah. And then it shows up in Harry Potter, of course, and then Beowulf, and Shakespeare talks about it, Chaucer talks about it. There's mead popping up all over the place, and as people discover it, I mean, even ancient Greece, there are some people who think that Bacchus was the god of mead before he was the god of wine.
Oh.
Before agriculture and viticulture became something that people understood, having access to sugar to make alcohol with was relatively rare.
Yeah.
So when it did happen, it was probably a happy accident that, like, here's this tree where there's been a beehive, the tree has fallen over, and now there's this mix of honey and water and these yeasts that just float around in the air, and it's a bubbly drink, and it tastes good, and when you drink it, your hunting and gathering becomes a lot more fun and celebratory. So,
although a little bit less accurate with the stabbing and swords and shooting of arrows.
Yeah, probably not going to be doing much hunting after that point, unless you're Dick Cheney. No.
Okay, let's go to India.
Okay. Yeah, so India, the Rig Veda, which is written like 3,500 years ago, if I have that accurate, it's kind of considered the Old Testament of Hinduism. So before the Bhagavad Gita, before the Ramayana, these like more modern religious stories that people are raised with. The Rig Veda is more of a like deep dive into how the ancient Vedics, who are considered like the priestly caste of India before more modern Hinduism, how they understood the world. And there's all kinds of cool things about how like sound was the first source in the universe.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
And it's pretty wild, right? When we like vibrate matter, or when we vibrate sand on a disc, it like coalesces depending on the frequency.
Oh, yeah.
And so like, is that where early forms of energy became the first forms of matter, was because sound started to happen?
So like their genesis is in that book, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so in the Rig Veda, it says, in the wide striding Vishnu's highest footsteps, and Vishnu is like the preserver god,
Okay.
to grossly simplify things.
That's what we're here for.
He is. Vishnu like has shown up like 7 times in the creation of this universe. So this universe has been created multiple times.
Okay.
So Vishnu shows up and he preserves things. When things get a little wobbly, some avatar of Vishnu shows up. So there are some Hindus who believe that like Buddha and Jesus were avatars of Vishnu, just showing up to help the world when they needed it. So like when the early Christians came to India, they were like, hey, have you heard about Jesus? And they're like, tell us about Jesus. And then they tell them about Jesus, and they're like, cool, Vishnu visited you. Congratulations. So in
No, not Vishnu. Jesus.
Yeah, you don't know about reincarnation? So in the wide striding Vishnu's highest footsteps, right, making morning, noon, and night, like as the preserver god walks across the universe, there is a spring of mead. So like Madhu, this beautiful thing that is the alcohol you get when you ferment honey, but it's also sweetness and wisdom and like the goodness of life. It all flows out of Vishnu's footsteps.
Okay.
And that's in the Rig Veda.
Wow. So it's like, it's deep in their culture if it's in their genesis, essentially.
Yeah. Nowadays, there's a long period of kind of alcohol being taboo.
Okay.
You know, but this modern, more global generation of Indian middle class and upper middle class and like global culture is definitely getting interested in mead. And there's a cool meadery in Mumbai, Sarana Meads, who are friends of ours, and we met them at UC Davis when they were getting their master's and PhD in environmental engineering. And so they really wanted to make a positive impact in the world with the product. So they started their meadery. And Yogini is the founder. She's pretty rad.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to me that like mead has such a deep history, but like not a lot of places. It's not like a common drink nowadays, essentially, and a lot of places are revisiting it, such getting back into mead, and it goes back to like where this world is the most connected it's ever been, but also probably the most divided it's ever been.
It's interesting, man.
And one of the interesting thoughts that I have is maybe mead has been missing from our world.
Amen, brother.
And if we want to be more connected, we should all just drink more mead, maybe.
I think there's something to that. I think it's definitely part of why we're all here. Yeah, I'd love to flesh that thread out a bit, because it comes back to what is culture, you know, and do we have the capacity to build a global culture where people are really connected and have a sense of shared identity and shared understanding? And if so, how do we encourage that culture's growth so that when crazy things happen, we don't see the worst in each other, and instead we see the best in each other?
I mean, yeah, I agree. I feel like we as the world need to look for the good in people, because it's really easy to see the bad, but looking for the good can be a start to our healing process.
Yeah, and coming together to work together to help our Earth continue to be able to support life. If you're into that.
Regeneratively.
That's right. We need building regenerative bridges globally. And, we do know a dude in Africa who, he's in Uganda. He has an incredible story. His name's Ojok Simon. Have I shared about this on the podcast?
Not that I know.
No. So Ojok was kidnapped as a kid by the Lord's Resistance Army.
Okay.
Gnarly, child soldier enslaving army. And he tried to escape, so they caught him and they beat him severely and they made him basically go blind.
Jeez.
And being of no use to them anymore, they let him go, or he escaped again and made his way back home somehow and taught himself beekeeping. And so in teaching himself beekeeping, he was able to produce a living for himself and then get himself through college, get himself through school, get himself through college, studied economic development so that he could help other people. He started a nonprofit called Hive Uganda.
Wow.
Yeah, where he trains other blind and partially sighted people how to keep bees so they can make a livelihood for themselves. So Ojok's in Africa training blind beekeepers, and we meet him through the Nelson Mandela Foundation. And he wins a Lighthouse Award. He's on stage with the blind guy that climbed Everest.
Oh, wow.
Getting this award for blind people about leadership and setting an example for what can be done even if you can't see. And our community raises the money to get him down to San Diego. To our community at Golden Coast Mead raises I think $3,000 or $4,000 to get him down to San Diego and train him in mead making. So I got to teach him how to do mead making and connect him with some equipment from some local suppliers, which he was able to take home.
Wow.
And then he made mead at his organization in Uganda. Super rad. So, yes, we can connect the world through regenerative mead. It has been done, and we can keep doing it.
Have we ever gone any of his honey here?
We have. It's pretty smoky because they use, mahogany wood to smoke the bees. So, as we've continued to develop a relationship, there's been an effort to try to figure that out so that But maybe we could come up with, an oaked style that was better suited. And then getting it imported from Uganda is things that other people are better at than I am. But hopefully, I don't know. I mean, he was selling a bottle of mead in Uganda for 4,000 Ugandan shillings, which translates to $5 retail. So even if we could buy it at retail by the pallet from him and get it over here and then sell it to our market, there's probably
that's a super cool story.
Win-wins. Yeah. So
okay, back to history.
Yeah.
Took a side stuff there about uniting the world with mead. But okay, so you mentioned Greece and how there's even stories about how Bacchus was the god of mead before wine.
Yeah.
Is there anything else there with Greece?
There's so much there with Greece. It's so rad. So Greece is known for these Eleusinian mysteries, right?
Okay. What are those?
Cicero, who was this Roman historian, looked at the history of Greece in 200 AD. And he was Greece gave the world a lot of things. Democracy, economy, geometry, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle. Foundational parts of the reality that we share. But the greatest thing that they gave the world, he says, were the Eleusinian mysteries.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And Marcus Aurelius, who got to witness the Eleusinian mysteries, said, "Those that witness the Eleusinian mysteries have nothing to fear from death, while those that do not have everything to fear from death."
Oh, jeez. Okay.
Yeah. Paraphrasing a little bit there, but yes, that's the intent. So these Eleusinian mysteries were pretty incredible, and anyone could go to them. You didn't have to be a noble. You could be a slave. You could be a servant. You could be whomever.
Okay, were they landmarks? Or
it was at a
stories?
place in Eleusis. It was a 3-day walk from Athens.
Okay.
And if you were going to go to Eleusis, you had to do this pilgrimage where you fasted while you walked there.
Okay. So it's a literal physical place, like a city. Okay.
Yeah, town. So anyone could go there as long as they hadn't killed a Greek citizen.
Okay.
So you
It's
could,
a good standard to have.
you know. So you get to Eleusis, and the first ring that you encounter are these bee priestesses called the Melissae, because the Greek word for honeybee is Melissa.
Okay.
So these bee priestesses are priestesses to the goddess Artemis, who's like Diana in Roman mythology, and you have to like pour libations for them. So there's a good chance that the first thing you're drinking is the libation that is offered to the bee priestesses. Can you think of a libation that might be offered to bee priestesses?
Honey and water fermented, maybe?
Yeah, maybe. And so like the Greeks called it mythos,
Okay.
mead, and in Old Welsh, the word for mead made with spices and herbs was methylene.
Okay.
And that was like their form of medicine in Wales and Britain. And Shakespeare talks about this, that like, drink the methylene, it'll make you better.
Okay.
So there's a good chance that there are herbs delivered in this drink. And you, well, after you did that offering, then you got to like participate in this pageant where these priests and priestesses took on the forms of gods, like put on costumes and makeup and masks, and acted out the Persephone myth about Demeter's daughter. Demeter is the goddess of like agriculture, and Persephone is like the goddess of spring and flowers and fruiting trees. And if you think about myth as a historical or an embodied representation of human history in a way to like transfer knowledge before everyone was literate, right? Then going and showing up here, you were like learning about the transformation of human culture from kind of nomadic, wild culture to agrarian field culture.
After drinking a spiked alcohol.
Well, the spiked question. So this comes up in this book called The Immortality Key by Brian Marquescu.
Okay.
And what it was spiked with and what it was made from is like a question. He says that it was probably a wine, but it could have also been a beer. And depending on the context, might have been a mead. Like, who knows? But they find some archaeological evidence that is pretty compelling that there was ergot in it, which is the precursor to LSD. And it also is like what can make people very sick as St. Elmo's fire if the barley for a beer has been infected by it. So you have to like know how to work with this stuff, otherwise you can kill people.
Yeah, it's a two-edged sword.
Very, very two-edged, yeah. But
You either get an LSD trip or you die.
go crazy. Yeah, so be careful. But he talks about like these people who were the priests and priestesses were holding this container for all of these people.
Okay.
And the Melissae are kind of there, and then you've got the Hierophant, who's like this revealer of secrets, and then you've got this like chief priestess who I don't even understand her role and what she represents, but they act out the Persephone story where Persephone gets kind of bargained off by Zeus to Hades without Demeter's agreement. And so Demeter is pissed and she disappears from Earth and the humans go through like starvation.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Yeah. And so they have to go get Persephone back from the underworld. And they witness this after they've drunk in the Kykeon, which is this like sacred potion, the recipe of which was never written down. And
more drugs.
Well, the drugs, same drugs, just that's the name for them, right? And it's like everyone is doing it. Like you fasted for 3 days, you're gonna go and like Cicero and Marcus Aurelius say, like this is a transformational experience.
Oh yeah.
To be able to witness all this and participate in it.
Oh, yeah. So my mind immediately goes to: has anyone ever tried to like reenact this?
Yeah. There's an argument that's what like all the mystery cults do, like the Neoplatonists, like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, like
they're all trying to replicate this
experience,
like Grecian experience that is recorded in history.
As Brian Marquescu says it, like the religion with no name is what he calls it.
So I think the last thing we're going to cover is the Middle East.
Oh yeah. So in the Middle East, in the Torah, the Old Testament, there's this proverb that 31:6 that says, "Give beer to the weary,
Okay.
wine to the sick at heart,
Okay.
and strong drink to those that are close to death."
Ooh.
And the Hebrew word is shakar, and there's an argument that shakar is the alcohol made from honey.
Oh, interesting.
So if you're close to death,
Drink mead.
drink mead.
It'll regenerate you and make you close to life.
I mean, that's
That's good. Okay.
yeah, yes.
So essentially, there is some Old Testament information on mead. Most likely, even though mead's not specifically mentioned in the Old Testament.
Right, and the Hebrew word shakar, like there's argument over whether shakar means honey wine or date wine,
Oh, okay. Just because of the origin of the word is unclear.
and etymology is tricky. Like,
Yeah.
where exactly did it first show up? What did they have available to them? The land of milk and honey, like, were they talking about actual honey, like from the honeycomb, or were they talking about dates? It's to be determined. But there was honey in the Middle East, and the likelihood that they turned it into alcohol is high. And to call it something different than wine makes sense, right?
Yeah, to give it a different
And also, in the Yiddish, the term for getting drunk is getting shekkered.
Sugar. I didn't know that. So just more evidence for it being honey wine.
Maybe, yeah.
Okay. That's cool. Is there anything else that we didn't cover about the history of mead that you want to talk about?
I mean, I wish I knew more. If people know out there more and want to like dive in with us, all in, we would love to talk mead lore and cite, first sources and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I don't think we know much about Chinese mead lore. So.
At all. And to go deeper in any one of these routes, I think would be super rad. Like if you know Ethiopian tej makers, or if you know people that are into Viking history and English and ancient English texts, Celtic texts. I just recently heard that there was some inscription written down in Greek in Celtic Gaul that said "friendly through mead." And so it was like a term to describe, like, I know him, we're friendly through mead. Like, we've gotten drunk on mead together, and we're pretty down. Yeah.
That's cool.
There might be some things to verify, but we're close. Yeah.
We can sit down and we can work through it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if anyone out there, email us at podcast@goldencoastmead.com. We'd love to talk to you, set it up.
And if there's anything else you want to hear about, email podcast@goldencoastmead.com. Maybe one day we'll run a few special experiences for folks that are way into the podcast. Like, what if we could go on a camp out, have a mead experience, and then talk about all this stuff and actually experience it instead of just talk about it.
That's exciting. I'm down for that.
Word.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing your knowledge about history of mead. And yeah, you'll hear us again soon.
Cheers.
Cheers.